Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Sing Sing director, co-writer, and producer Greg Kwedar, writer and producer Clint Bentley, and producer Monique Walton. Thank you all for being here. Greg, you learned about this rehabilitation through the arts program 8 years ago. How did you know you wanted to make a movie about it?
You know, like hearing about the program itself, it doesn't take long to see its potential as a world for a movie and just the architecture of a play from casting to opening night, that the contradiction of that this even exists inside of a maximum security prison and the inherent power of like this sort of form of defiance by creating art inside of a place like that. That was all clear, but knowing it was like that we had to be a part of it was reading an Esquire magazine article about a particular production that was put on in 2005 of a time traveling musical comedy called Breaking the Mummy's Code. And then that was just like undeniable because there was something about this bizarre play that had like, you know, ancient Egypt and pirates and Old West gunfights and rap numbers and dance numbers and like a Hamlet soliloquy just in there for I don't know why. And yet through all of it, that there was just this kind of abundant joy, that you could feel like leaping off the page and the photos and, the playfulness of the work juxtaposed with the environment was set within. It was just there's something so attractive and like necessary about it that was reminding me of like how I felt as a kid when I was first exposed to creativity and art and just like it was reawakening something in me. Even just reading the magazine piece that I knew it that I had to be a part of it in some way and bringing that to life as a film.
And Clint, I understand there were different versions of the script before you nailed down what you called an anchor to the film. So how did you decide that John Divine G Whitfield was that anchor?
Yeah, it was a long process of making a lot of the wrong decisions for like 6 years in writing the different iterations of the script. We started out going very broad, and just doing a real like kind of Nashville-esque like ensemble piece where no person was the main character, and it was just telling the story of how a play goes from casting to opening night inside of a maximum security prison. That wasn't enough, and there wasn't enough for anybody to hold on to. Then we went super deep and kind of we created this pastiche character who was had a lot of elements from people we had met from not only meeting the guys who were on the outside and hearing their stories, but also Greg and I going inside as volunteer teachers inside of a prison. Um, and that was too specific and didn't like capture some of the magic of the world. And it was really something that Greg just lit on and kind of had some aha moment that he can maybe explain or maybe not. That's centered it on this friendship between Divine Eye and Divine G that was based on their real life friendship and how it developed over years. And that all of a sudden, just like anchoring it on the the still the structure of telling the story of this play from casting to opening night, plus this friendship that develops over time, and the juxtaposition of somebody who's been in this program a long time, helped start it through Divine G and believes wholeheartedly in it, and juxtaposing that with somebody who's just coming in and kind of thinks it's silly. It was just like uh, it all coalesced in a really nice way.
And Coleman was that perfect choice to play Divine G. Talk about that.
Absolutely.
I mean that happened. I mean arriving at that friendship narrative, like it had been things that Clint and I had been poking at and talking about, and we had known the real Divine Eye and Divine G for a long time, 6 years at that point. But it was really the synthesis happened in that moment, and it was I remember it very clearly. It was like in November of 2021, and I wrote out a treatment in my notebook in about 10 minutes And at the very bottom of the page, I just wrote Coleman Domingo as Divine G. It was kind of a mystery again. It was an intuition that it just felt like it was like sort of a destiny thing. Like even though we'd never met Coleman before, like had no access to him or like that at least that we knew of. And a few months later, we were able to get on a Zoom with him. And because we were now starting over with an entirely new storyline, we had thrown all of our old scripts out. So we didn't have a script to share with him. We had raised no money. And so he got on the Zoom with us. Just the only thing we had to share was the original Esquire article, actually. And so he gets on with us and he's like, I just read the article. I've got so many questions for you guys. And you're like, well, great, but we're going to tell you about the 6 years that happened after we first read the article. And we told him this journey of how we had arrived to the moment of meeting him. And he listened and he was just like, you know, at this point in my career, I'm realizing that there are some projects that are seeking you to teach you something. You don't know what it is, you just know that it's trying to. And I'm saying yes to that at this point in my life. And so I've got 3 weeks open this July, and I was like, I'll take them. And it was just, and he was like, well, hold on, like, how do you think that we can pull all of this off? And there was just this feeling of like, if he was gonna lean in like that, then we could lean in and it could happen. I mean, trust the process is spoken about a lot in inside of our film itself, but we in the making of it had to do the same. And you know, you just believe that with someone of his caliber, with this confidence that we finally had found in the story, that it was just all going to work somehow, even though we didn't know exactly how we might arrive at that. And probably is a nice segue into Monique because we would then need someone to help us figure out how to pull
How
it
to put
off.
it together.
I was gonna ask Monique. I mean, then this all gets sort of rushed along. Was it a 4 week shoot or something? How do you pull off a movie of this caliber in such a short amount of time? And how did you meet up with these two guys?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, how do we pull it off? I still ask me myself that
Who knows?
question.
Yeah.
But I met Greg and Clint by chance in Austin after Greg randomly, sublet an office space that I had in Austin, and we ended up hanging out because he was like at the end of his sublet, and so we sat around a fire just sharing, just kind of sharing how we made films and like our film backgrounds. And I realized that we had really similar approaches to film. I think part of it came from having a background in documentary as well, and just think thinking that, you could build a film like with a community and in collaboration with community. Um, and how do you create space for like a really strong creative exchange with the community that you're telling a story with? And we had both lived in Texas in Austin for over a decade and never crossed paths until that fire, and then realized like, oh wow, we have a lot in common. We kind of make movies the same way. And so several months later, he and Clint asked me to moderate a panel about their previous film, Jockey, and the financial model that they had built on that film that we then eventually ended up, expanding on Sing Sing. And after, this is March, they at South by Southwest, they took me out for a drink after the panel and pitched me on Sing Sing. And, similarly to Coleman, didn't have when we had the conversation, didn't have any financing in place,
You
had
still
a
have
target
that
date shooting window and said, we're shooting this in 4 months. Like, do you want to jump in? Like we don't have the script is in progress, it's not totally finished yet. And so I took some time to think on it, but ultimately realized that there was something really special and kinetic about this story, and that it was about healing and it was about vulnerability and the ways that that is in and of itself radical, especially when you're in a space of incarceration. And so I jumped in, and Yeah, I mean, in terms of how it all came together, part of it is just that, the stars align. And you're just like, the stars are aligning, the train is leaving the station. But I think that, the other part is that they had done the work of the 6 years of development that was needed to kind of tell this story with the community in a really powerful way. And then, we built this structure of pay parity that also helped attract people to the project that would also be really leaning into telling the story in a different way without hierarchy, and embracing a culture that was about empowering everyone on the cast and the crew to kind of bring their whole selves to the project and become like a full stakeholder in the project.
And one of those highlights, and speaking of the stars aligning, is Clarence Maclin as Divine Eye, and he's telling his own story in this film. So, how powerful was that casting, and in a broader sense, casting other former members of the RTA program in this film as well?
I mean, you know, 8.5 years ago, we sat around a breakfast table at Brent Beal's apartment and met many of the alumni from the program who are now in our movie all these years later. And it was undeniable the talent that was there. And it's not just like, yes, there's craft and there's, you know, uh, talent that has been developed through the work that these men have done on the stage and with the teachers that they've had and through the community that they built. But there's like a deeper human talent that's there in terms of I would say just like accessibility to the soul, and that's a hard thing to try to quantify, but it's like there is an immense power in how available and present these men are and what that conveys on the screen, you know. And I think an epitome of that is Clarence Divine Eye Maclin, who is just, I mean, the guy's just a star, and that was clear when we met him 8.5 years ago when he walked. Like I almost felt him before he even entered the room. It's like that kind of presence, and that breakfast all those years ago was like, oh my, this guy's got to be in the movie. I mean, that was just clear, but we weren't entirely sure how much the alumni would figure into like our actual creative process on screen. That was an evolution with time. Like our confidence just didn't lessen with time, and that it deepened, and it moved from alumni should be in this film as like a feature of it to with time this is actually the life force of the movie, and it's like very much the core of what the movie is. That grew and that deepened, and that was part of just our relationships, and the trust that we built through all those years, and how much we began to know these men and their stories. But also, just as we grew as filmmakers, we made a film called Jockey that Clint directed that, took a handful of established actors and moved them into a real life working racetrack, and everyone else in the film were real jockeys and trainers. And I just remember being on set producing for him and watching some of these moments happen. I was like, I just want to double down on whatever's going on here, like, and Sing Sing feels like this very unique vessel that can take established actors with people with real lived experience, but also acting experience, and bring that inside of a storytelling vessel. Um, and it was just like, honestly, that alchemy, that exchange, like led to these really transcendent moments on screen that are just indelible. And you felt it in the room when we were capturing it to film, and every time I see the movie now.
And Clint, you and Greg were in communication with Divine Eye and Divine G, like you said. How important was their input? They have a story by credit on the
Yeah.
film. How important was their input in the authenticity of the experience and the language of this film?
Incredibly important. And I think that, yeah, that story by credit is not something that we treat lightly, and it's something that really is indicative of the contribution that they made to this film and to the script. We were always trying to find this balance between needing to tell the story and needing to, make the story work and make it function as a story and hit the beats that it needed to make, while never betraying the reality and the truth of not only what these people had been through and what their friendship, how it had developed, but also who they were as people. And so we really developed that in lockstep with them. And that's on kind of a macro level. On a micro level, there were so many things where we had heard a story from them or heard a story from somebody else that we were trying to express in a scene, and we would talk to them about it and say like, hey, we're trying to get this across. One example being the first scene where we meet Clarence Maclin, we meet Divine Eye in the film, was a scene where we were trying to get across, like in one scene, that this person is someone who is leading a certain life in the yard where he's a person to be feared in the yard of the prison, but then also has this magnetism and this talent that shines through all of that. And like, how do you do that in one scene? And we were talking to Divine Eye about this, and we were saying, well, we've got this idea and this idea. And he goes, well, here's what I used to do sometimes. And that birthed this amazing moment in the film. Another example of that is the kind of the centerpiece of the film in Divine G's clemency hearing, where he's asked about what this program means to him, and he's talking about how much it means to him and the men and what it does for them, and just talking about the beauty of it. And then the parole officer asks, "Are you, are you acting right now?" And just totally kills everything in that moment, kills his hope of being set free. And that was something that we were trying to write a hearing, and Greg called Divine G and just asked him about, like, talked about like finding some transcriptions of other hearings, and John was like, well, I could send you mine. And that was something that was pulled directly from his actual hearing. So yeah, there's on a macro and micro level, like their impact and contribution to the story, like it can't be overstated.
And finally, this film is such a great showcase of what rehabilitation is. And when we look at our system, most facilities are missing that component. And this RTA program specifically has shown how much impact it has on people's lives, and how successful they are when they leave prison. Why are programs like this not the norm? And do you think this helps show a path forward?
How long do you have to talk about capitalism?
1 minute.
Okay, go ahead, Monique.
Why are programs not the norm? I mean, if you just think about how the systems function in our society, they don't function to rehabilitate. The recidivism rate nationwide is 60%, of people who get out of prison end up returning to prison after they're released. And the recidivism rate for folks who have gone through RTA is less than 3%. So we already know that is it's just not how our systems are built in this country, and it's an issue, and it is something that, you know, something to sit with. I think that we live in this country that incarcerates, so much of the population, way more than any other country incarcerates their people. And why is that? I think there are many levels, and yeah, I don't think we have time to go through all of the reasons for that. But in terms of a path forward, that was, something that we wanted to share in terms of as a gesture, as an invitation for people to think about, like, the goal of this program, the fact that you can change someone's life with a theater program in such a profound way, and in a way that we've seen just through, everyone we've worked with on the film and spoken to. And we know that RTA, with the exposure of this film, is expanding their network and sharing the information around how they actually were able to do this. It took decades, but It's been the program has been in place for over 25 years. But it's important, I think, for everyone to be. It's inspiring to me, and I hope that, other people who watch the film are also inspired to
It's
figure out how to change our system. Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's also not rocket science. It's like wherever people have access to art, they thrive, you know, period. And I think there's a great lesson to learn from just watching the story unfold, a lesson we sadly have to keep learning over and over and over again. But I think it's made, more potent by seeing it happen and be so successful inside of a place like Sing Sing. It's like if it can happen here inside these walls, then it can and surely should happen everywhere and for all of us, And so yeah, reinvest in art and creativity. And these are the building blocks, I think, of building fuller, better, more realized people, and I think we need to just remember that our creativity and are just as fundamental and essential as like the air we breathe.
Well, and inspiring work, and you can just feel it in the room when you see this in a theater with people. It's such a uplifting movie, and congratulations to all of you, and good luck to everyone and the cast and crew at the award season.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dan.
Denton.
Yeah.